So this is where I'm getting freaked out, right? Seeing this story out of France, I saw this the other day. I covered it a little bit, and there were some political leaders in the country who said that leftist ideology on race and gender is destroying France and they need to stop it. Now they're to the point where their former generals are warning Macron of civil war. And we've seen many similar articles in the United States from prominent publications talking about the prospect of civil war in this country. I know a lot of people on the left like to laugh about it and pretend it's not a reality, but then maybe January 6th might change their minds. When you see what happens with Chauvin, and based on the things you're telling me, where a pig's head and blood at the home of one of the witnesses who had already testified, a message to the jury, a Democrat, a federal politician who straight up threatened more violence. She didn't say the word violence, said more confrontation, right, as they're already rioting. And
in the context of violence.
Right, in the context of...
There's only one way to interpret
of
that.
A year of riots.
Right.
And now we have the other remaining officers in the Chauvin trial who are their trial is set for August, I believe. We also have Kyle Rittenhouse. Now we have this Elizabeth City case. Now we have a Virginia case. Not only are these instances going to keep happening, because sometimes cops use lethal force, whether it's justified or not, it's going to keep happening. It will be weaponized by hard left cultists, people who believe that might makes right and they can do whatever they want. And then there's not going to be a system of justice for anyone involved. Cops are already resigning en masse across the country and have been since last year. And it's getting worse. Even in the area we're in right now, a local town is facing a shortage of police and they don't know what to do about it. So at what point do people just say, I have no faith in the system anymore? And do we just see people taking up arms in their own neighborhoods, rejecting the law? I mean, how does a regular person function in a society that has thrown out the rule of law?
Well, mostly you just hope it doesn't happen to you. Mostly you just hope that you don't get targeted. That's the only thing you can hope for. The solution is certainly not private justice. That just makes you even more vulnerable to successful prosecution than if you had the background and training and badge and apparent authority of a police officer. You're not less vulnerable to this kind of prosecution. You're more likely to make mistakes. You're more likely to be mischaracterized. Look at the guys in the Ahmaud Arbery case who were making what was almost certainly a lawful citizen's arrest under Georgia law. You may not like the Georgia citizen's arrest law. I get that. Reasonable people can disagree. But if you read the law, they almost certainly met the conditions for making a lawful citizen's arrest of Arbery. And they're not being treated like cops. They're just being treated as people who wanted to be cops and murdered a black man for jogging through a neighborhood. So I don't think private
justice...
justice...
full details are irrelevant.
Yeah.
I remember when I covered that, and I believe there's surveillance footage of him entering this private property.
Correct.
And I had these people on the left. They don't care. They believe there's no truth but power, and they believe might makes right. So when I come out and say, like, oh, there's a video, the guy was trespassing. I mean, in West Virginia, you're allowed, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, so fact check me on this one, but I'm pretty sure you're allowed to shoot someone to stop them from entering your property. You don't even have to wait until they get on your property. You can prevent them from accessing your property.
Well, in most states, if someone's attempting to forcibly and unlawfully enter your dwelling, your place of business, your occupied vehicle, there's a legal presumption they're doing it to cause you deadly bodily harm, which would justify your use of deadly defensive force.
Not in New Jersey. In New Jersey, you have to run away. I don't know where you run to when you're in your home and you have to retreat from your own home. I guess if you're sitting in your bed in your underwear and someone breaks in your house, go stand in an alley somewhere in your underwear, I guess, and pray for the best. But that's the law in some of these places.
It's unfortunate when that happens. Unfortunately, I certainly hope there is not a civil war. I mean, when we had a civil war last time, I believe the death count was something like 600,000, and that's just massive combat deaths. That's not. It doesn't even count people who starved and suffered other catastrophes. A civil war in America, it would easily be 60 million people who ended up dying, especially in the just-in-time economy in which we live and where your grocery store in 2 days, if it's not resupplied, is completely out of food, as we learned during the COVID era.
That's right. But I'll clarify this point, because it's been a minute since we've talked about civil war here on the show, but we talk about it decently amount in the context of the escalation of violence. I can't remember which guest this was, but they made a really great point. I often say that when people look at civil war in the United States, the potential for it, and there's a Princeton a professor who said we're in a cold civil war. This is not something I just made up. You saw that story.
I agree. We are in a cold civil war. My concern would be if it goes hot.
So here's the issue is that people imagine the American Civil War as how civil wars work. That's not true. Most civil wars do not function this way, where you have states seceding and then two factions fighting, each other on the battlefront.
That can't happen anymore. Not the way we're structured.
Right, absolutely.
societally.
But even other countries where there's been civil war, it's a bunch of different pockets rise up, and there's violence against local government, against different factions. We had someone on the show, I can't remember who it was, but they said, what happens in America will look more like Syria.
Yes.
You'll have 30 or 40 factions. You'll have different, elements of the government, and everyone will be fighting in different places for different reasons. It's not going to be structure. It's just going to be violence and chaos. And it's going to be, different in different areas. And I think that seems to be a likely scenario right now, especially based on what we're seeing in Minnesota.
It may be likely. I mean, I certainly hope it doesn't happen for all the reasons I just described. I think the death toll would be unimaginable.
Yep.
But there's really only three options, right? There's reconciliation between the left and the right. There's civil war, or there's subjugation of the right by the left. So which of those outcomes are we going to pick? I don't see reconciliation anywhere in our future. I'd like to think there's not going to be a civil war, but I certainly wouldn't be happy about the third outcome, which would be effective subjugation of 49% of the population.
Well, subjugation is happening. I mean, when I see these cops, after everything you've just told me about the Chauvin case and the way you presented, I mean, people being brought in under armed guard with cops, machine guns, pig's blood, all that stuff. I can't believe there are still police officers who would wear that badge, because they are representing a city that knows what they did, a judicial system that knows what they did, and they're effectively supporting it by doing so.
Well, they're not really staying, though. So Minneapolis PD has lost something like 20% of its officers in the last year. Those you can't just apply that 20% generally, because there's huge chunks of the police force that are not interacting with the public like street cops. They're at the academy. They're in the headquarters. Those people are not leaving. They're not in danger of being Derek Chauvin because they're not going hands-on with suspects. So if they say 20% of the total police force is leaving, that has to be 40 to 50% or more of the street cop guys.
It's a great
and they're
point.
not going to get replaced by better quality officers. They're going to get replaced by people like some of the cops involved in the arrest. People, it's their fourth or third call out on the street when suddenly they find themselves in a George Floyd event. They don't make better calls.
Right.
They make worse use of force calls. We're going to see more cases in which cops are using force inappropriately. And by the way, I don't want to suggest to anybody that I think cops always use force appropriately. There's many cases where they use force inappropriately. But my observation, based on my experience, is when that happens, they are held accountable. So what I object to is this notion that cops are rampantly going around using force inappropriately and society's just letting them do that. That's not true.
Right. What's surprising to me is, well, before I get into that, the rookie cops more likely to get killed and more likely to kill, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Bad use of force calls.
Less experience, poorer judgment because of that lack of experience. Those are the guys more likely to accidentally go to the gun when they meant to go to the taser. And you end up with more force being used inappropriately. You don't get better outcomes by having a less experienced police force.
So this is only going to exacerbate the problem. It's going to keep happening.
Right.
Then you're going to get more of these lawyers coming out saying, oh, these cops did wrong. See, this is proof. We got to abolish the police. This is why I'm surprised. Who in their right mind would sign up to be a police officer right now?
I don't think anybody is.
Well, they have rookies. They have people coming and joining the force.
People,
these people have to be insane.
Desperate for the job, who don't understand the risks, or who believe that, hey, it won't happen to me.
Yep,
I just have to be, right? Because most officers are not involved in a George Floyd type of case. But of course, it's not up to the cop. I mean, one thing most people, I don't think they realize, it's not really the cop who decides how much force to use in an encounter with a violently non-compliant suspect. It's the suspect who determines how much force is going to be used. So it's not really within the cop's control unless the cop decides, I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to go hands-on. I'm just going to let this person go. And whose interest is that in? I mean, it's cities where the police have long adopted that kind of approach that have become the high crime hellholes, and not for people who live in rich suburbs, but for the people who are caught, captured, trapped in those urban centers and violence, who, by the way, when they're asked, they want more police.
Yep.
They don't want the police defunded.
However, we've seen from Gallup that many people in these places do say they want more cops, but I don't see them coming out to support the police. I don't see them going to fundraisers. I don't see them marching in the streets. So the way I see it is, you can tell me you want something, but if you've got people setting fires to buildings, destroying them completely, beating people in the streets, smashing windows, that's the voice being heard in the press, and you won't even stand up outside with a sign, you've abstained from the vote.
right? You have to put your vote where your mouth is. And if you don't do that, nothing changes. But in fact, nothing changes. I mean, just look at the school systems in these same places. Those school boards are elected by the residents in those communities, and they continue to elect people who don't educate their children. So
indoctrinate their children.
Well, what are we supposed to make of that? Again, they don't put their votes where they say their mouth is.
So we've seen a massive escalation in violent crime across the country. We've seen shootings skyrocketing. I think New York, it's like, what, 250% or some ridiculous number.
275 or something.
275, some ridiculously large number. Cops are at a point now where we've already seen many resign. I think in Albuquerque recently, 20 officers resigned from their emergency response team, so no more riot control. They're going to bring in rookies, cadets to be trained. Oh, that'll go well. Yep. So we're going to get more of these instances, but we're also going to hear more of cops saying, I'm not going to either, I'm going to quit the job and go somewhere else. I've gotten those emails. Or we're going to see cops who just say, I won't respond to that call. Gun violence and crime will continue to skyrocket in places like New York, Chicago, and I believe LA, obviously the big cities. And then what happens when someone finally says, I'm going to fight back, or I'm going to form my own neighborhood watch group and we're going to take up arms? Now you see the emergence of urban factions opposing uncontrollable violence. Yeah, that's the seed for some serious urban conflict.
I understand the drivers that would lead people to want to protect their own communities or homes by forming these private little cooperative groups. The legal jeopardy they're creating for themselves is unbelievable, because if something goes bad, if they are then involved in some kind of George Floyd-like event, the prosecutors will characterize it as a conspiracy among the group. Each and every one of them will be equally responsible for the worst conduct of any of their members. So if it turns out there's some lunatic in your group that you didn't realize was a lunatic until he got a chance to point a gun at somebody and he murders someone, straight out murders someone, if you're deemed a co-conspirator, you committed that murder, my friend.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.